following program is classified G. It's suitable for all ages.
Tonight, the make or break investment in Sri Lanka, the Colombo Port City project. $1 billion investment by the country with several grey areas for clarification in the legal sphere. Interested parties who are vying towards disruption in the country have been spewing myths about the remarkable opportunity, given the fact that it is a multilateral effort which, if executed to its full potential, would uplift the country's economic standards towards a developed status. Will the port city be held down by jurisdictional conflicts, or will the project be the beacon of economic prosperity in the 21st century? Welcome to Law, Land and Liberty, where we are keeping with the promise to discuss legal topics pertaining to our country and exactly to get a proper breakdown for pertinent topics that are present within the public forum as of today. And today the discussion is going to be on the Port City Bill, the Commission and all the other variables that are attached to it. And it's something that will affect almost all Sri Lankans within this country, and if it is successful. So to give a breakdown, we have with us a very special guest, someone who has joined us before, Dr. Asanga Gunawansa. Thank you so much for joining us again. He's the lead counsel at the Colombo Law Alliance. He's a visiting professor at the University of Moratuwa and legal consultant to the Green Climate Fund. A lot of important things to break down in today's discussion. As pertaining to the general way we conduct this program, we're going to give the viewers a breakdown of how the discussion is to proceed, and then we'll move into the first few segments. So firstly, we're going to talk about the significance of the Port City Bill, then the regulations for investors, third, the dispute resolution process, and finally the international parallels that can be drawn with the Port City.
Hi, my name is Mahieash De Silva, and I'm a brand executive at a leading local conglomerate. My question is regarding the significance of the Port City Bill. Does the law in the port city differ to that of any other part in Sri Lanka?
All right, let's move into our first segment. Doctor, a lot of misinformation has actually been disseminated pertaining to Port City, and this was a heated topic over a few months, and we are there again, where a lot of clarification is required, particularly towards the legal framework in play. And if we really address these step by step, I believe we can cover a lot of ground. Firstly, Doctor, the general problem that many face is pertaining to whether there's a mismatch, whether there's a conflict of laws when it comes to, I don't want to use this term because it's a bit, again, on the misinformation side, but the mainland and Port City, whether there's a differentiation there. But let's start there, Doctor, and I want to move to, within our first segment itself, pertaining to the Commission and the mandate there as well. Where does it differ from Sri Lankan law and the establishment of the Commission and the Port City Bill in particular? Are there differentiations that are so drastic that it is a separate jurisdiction altogether?
No. So the popular perception that is so drastic and it creates a completely different legal regime is a misnomer in my view, or a misconception rather. And you have to look at it from a very productive, sense. Like, say, for example, if you take the Asian region or South Asian region, we have about 1/5 of the world population living here, and that's a huge market, right? And having said that, when it comes to international investment, international trade transactions, international banking transactions, the service sector, we really don't have a good financial center which provides services and captures investment that could attract to this particular market. Now, on the other hand, if you look at East Asia, we have Hong Kong, we have Singapore, and now we have Labuan in Malaysia. Korea has started a financial center. In Dubai, we have the Dubai International Financial Center and the Qatar Financial Center. There are many offshore business centers, in Central Europe and so on. So in that context, having a population that big, as I said, approximately 1/5 of the world population, we would be very ignorant if we don't take the maximum advantage out of it. So if you look at all the countries which are in the South Asian region, I think Sri Lanka, even historically, that's why we were known as the Pearl of the Indian Ocean. I think we are ideally placed geologically and geographically And also when it comes to world affairs, because we have remained neutral as far as possible, over the years since we got independence. And we don't have any problem in attracting even investors and visitors from the region. Like say, for example, there are conflicts in South Asia between India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and so on, but none of these countries have any issue dealing with us, right? So likewise, even when it concerns foreign investors, although we opened the economy in 1977, with the idea of attracting a lot of foreign direct investment, we have not been able to benefit from that due to various reasons. The civil conflict that we had for almost 2.5 to 3 decades being one of the biggest problems. So it's with all these ideas being considered that respective governments which were in power have taken the initiative to develop the port city and go ahead with it. So if you look at the initial idea of developing or rather reclaiming land and developing a special economic area was mooted around 2005, 2006 if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And at that time a company in Singapore was consulted over this and they carried out a study, but of course then there was a change of government. And then around 2011, 2012 when Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa was the president, I think again this idea was mooted and they took the initiative to develop Colombo Port City. But of course at that time it was perceived more like a real estate development project, because Colombo business district, if we take CBD area, is still Fort and Peta, right? That's about 100, we have like 200, 300 year old development, in that area, and it's very, very congested. So if you are to compete with other regional hubs in Asia such as Hong Kong and Singapore, we needed new land. So that was the idea at that time. Then subsequently, probably this the benefits that the country could gain by converting this newly claimed land into a international financial center or economic zone was understood by those who matter and those who are in power. And then that idea was incorporated even into the project agreement, which is the tripartite agreement, which was signed around 2013 or 2014 thereabout, between the government of Sri Lanka, the Urban Development Authority at that time, and the CHEC Port City Private Limited, which was the project company, who invested about 1.4 billion US dollars to develop this project. Now that the reclamation work is almost over, the next thing that we need to look at is how do we now get the maximum benefit out of it. So you have to think beyond just putting vertical buildings and developing the Colombo Port City as a real estate development where you try to sell condominiums and things like that, and that might attract investment but not enough. So then we need to attract offshore businesses and so on, and if we are to do that, we have to provide certain incentives. Right now, say for example, if you have read the World Bank report on ease of doing business a couple of years ago, Sri Lanka was ranked very low, and especially when it comes to enforcement of contracts, our ranking was hideous, if I may say. So with that, although we have the Board of Investment and we have certain and we have a Strategic Development Projects Act, certain incentives are offered under these statutes to attract investors, we really couldn't benefit from that because that was just not enough when we compete with other countries in the region. So with that in view, the Colombo Port City Bill was mooted, that is to make sure that we are in a position to compete with other regional financial centers and attract business which would benefit Sri Lanka, right? And so if you have to do that, you might have to give certain special incentives. Now the concerns that were raised with this matter was, especially with the Port City Bill at the bill stage was challenged in the Supreme Court under Article 121 of the Constitution, was whether there would be discrimination and whether the government's power to rule this as one country would be undermined, and all those were misconceptions, and of course Supreme Court looked into it, and there were certain areas where Supreme Court found to be unconstitutional, and then their lordships even recommended certain amendments, and those amendments have been incorporated, and then the act was passed somewhere around May 2021 in Parliament. So now we have an act, and we have to, now it has become part of the law of the land, right? So the next thing that we need to do is we have to make it work. So in that context, if you study the act very carefully, I would say it's like a mother act. It provides the basic framework, but in order to implement some of those objectives and ideas that are found in that, you need to pass regulations. So these regulations will come, going forward. Regulations will come, and I know, as a matter of fact, the Port City Commission that was incorporated under the Port City Act is currently looking into the regulations that could be passed.
Doctor, just to interrupt you there now, when going over a lot of the literature that was present, both domestic and scholars abroad had written about this, and something that I saw that was cross-cutting and something you mentioned in the beginning as well, was this position, this geographical position of Sri Lanka, and how important that is and how that can be used to really benefit this project. Is that the only thing that we'll be able to offer in comparison? I don't want to bleed into our last segment about the other international parallels, but within the act itself, I think you were getting there also.
Correct.
What are the other areas that you would highlight, saying, okay, look, this is what we are offering in terms of relaxed measures, relaxed regulations?
Yeah, so in addition to investment-related incentives that we can give, like tax concessions, and so on, right, and facilitating business, establishing a single window system for ease of doing business. So, for example, currently, if you want to register a business, then you have to go through a particular process, and it might take, perhaps 1 to 2 weeks or slightly more. Right now, in a country like Singapore and Hong Kong, you can perhaps do it within 24 hours. So we have to come to improve things to that level in order to attract the key investment players in the world to find Sri Lanka as an attractive option. So those are things that could be done by way of regulations. As I said, the basic framework is already found in the statute. Yeah.
Okay, Doctor, just to build on where we started this discussion on this segment, again I move back to this conflict of law issue, because if we can clarify that will really shed a lot of light on the doubts, the misinformation that is spreading. Is it a separate jurisdiction? Should we be afraid of this project? Is there some issue of that?
No, certainly not. Because see, in order for a person, when I say person, a legal or natural person, to conduct business within the Colombo Port City, they have to be registered as authorized persons in terms of the Act, right? So when you seek authorized person registration, there is a dual regime. You require registration in terms of the Port City Act, which the Commission is empowered to grant. And then if it is a company, you will also need a registration under the Companies Act. So once you do that, the key element is that, so one of the issues that we had was whether the money already available in Sri Lanka will be used to, carry out investment in the port city, and they will be given further incentives. So if that happens from a taxation perspective and so on, the central government can lose because, the money is already there. Yeah. It's under the current tax regime that's where the government earns revenue. If you give incentives on that, what happens? Now, Port City Act ensures that all investments that are required to be brought into the country under the Port City Act will have to be raised overseas. Okay. Right? So in that sense, it's true for indirect investment. Say, for example, if you want to carry out business in the port city and you have money, either in foreign currency or local currency in a Sri Lankan bank, that can't be invested. Okay. And you have to raise money overseas. So there will be inflow of, investment coming in. Now, if you want to bring your investment, into the country, or if you want to attract, the investors to come in, then also we should allow them to take their profits out, and we have to offer them, certain investment-related benefits. True. Otherwise, they wouldn't come to Sri Lanka. Why would they? They can go to Labuan or Singapore or Hong Kong or Macau or wherever, right? Exactly. So in that sense, we have to, we have to be able to be competitive. So what people don't see is the fringe benefits or indirect benefits we can get. Now, the Colombo Port City project is, according to the current projections, can create about 200 to 250,000 employment opportunities going forward. Okay. Now, all these employees will not be Sri Lankan, but at least if 60 to 70% of them are Sri Lankans, then we will have, fairly good incentives, as far as these people are concerned.
Okay. A lot of things clarified in that scenario. I think something important that you did mention was pertaining to the investment method and how it should be, the currency should be actually founded or made abroad. A lot of things to dwell into in that segment as well. Let's talk about investment within our next segment. Doctor, before that, let's take a very short break. We're in conversation with Dr. Asanga Gunawansa, and we're talking about the Port City Bill and how exactly the legal framework will function. Stay with us on Law, Land and Liberty.
Hi, my name is Michelle Cruz and I'm a business owner. My question for you today is about regulations for investors. What are the special concessions awarded to investors?
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. We are in conversation with Dr. Asanga Gunawansa. A very detailed first segment that we just passed. Doctor, our next segment we are going to talk about the investors aspect of all of this, and the most important, I would say the key issue there now. Something you really did sort of context that you gave was that the finances should be coming from abroad. Now, one issue which really goes hand in hand with our first segment as well is whether the regulations for individuals abroad and domestic investors are separate. Is that the only situation where you would see that separation, where when it comes to the kind of finances that should be coming in, it should be made abroad, or are there other things that we should be aware of?
No, so to clarify, as I mentioned during the previous segment also, in order to be able to carry out businesses from and within the port city, you have to be recognized as an authorized person.
Okay.
So the authorized person can be a local or a foreign investor, it doesn't matter, because there are a lot of local companies also which might be able to raise money overseas and bring it to Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
So the focus is on where the investment inflow is coming from. Whether it is from inside to inside or whether it's from outside to inside.
Yeah.
And so in addition to that, regulations wise, there is, say, Colombo Port City Act itself is a law passed by our parliament, so it's a national law. Now it creates, we can talk about this a little bit later, but now it creates a special dispute resolution regime.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, there are certain statutes from which specific exemptions can be given. Say, for example, tax related exemptions and so on, from duties and levies that are payable. But otherwise, when you carry out business within the port city, that doesn't mean that you're not subject to the law of the land.
True.
Say, for example, if you commit a crime within the port city, you will be subject to the penal laws of the country, right? Yeah. And then, if there is a civil dispute, of course, if the dispute is between the Port City Commission and authorized person, it will have to be then subjected to arbitration because the Act requires you to do that. But beyond that, if there are other disputes which do not come within that arbitration regime, you will have to take them to local courts. You will be governed by the local procedural laws, is the law of contract or other civil laws that are applicable in the country, which will apply to that situation.
Okay. I think this clarification has been made multiple times by multiple individuals, but yes, Doctor, I think that's very important there as well. Something I want to then step into, which is sort of like the crux, I think the majority of the bill as well, so the Act as well focuses on is the commission. And if we do touch on this, the specific thing you mentioned about tax levies and when it comes to inland revenue per se, the commission has a certain amount, the mandate has been given a certain amount of authority to make those calls pertaining to, you could correct me if I'm wrong, pertaining to whether there are tax exemptions given. What is the process there like, Doctor? Is it specified in the bill? Can we address it from the Act, or are there any other specifications that we need to build the law in that area?
Yeah, so in order to provide a clarification, right, when you create a special law, dealing with economic commission. Just take a step back. Say, for example, if you look at statute passed in connection with national housing or urban development, two examples I can give you is, under those laws, a regulatory entity is created in order to implement the law, right? So, National Housing Development Authority when it comes to national housing, the Urban Development Authority when it comes to urban development, and so on. So, likewise, Even with regard to the Colombo Port City, you call it a special economic zone, you can give certain incentive, but there will have to be a regulator, right? So the Port City Commission has been created as a regulator. So under the Act, the Port City Commission has been given certain wide powers, but when it comes to granting of tax concessions and things like that, the Commission can't on its own go and decide, something which is completely outside the government policy, right? Say, for example, even when it comes to, like, say, registration of companies or giving certain incentives relating to taxation and so on, the Commission is expected to consult with the relevant line minister, the President, and also the relevant departments concerned. So it will be a collective decision that is made. But what is important is, because, like I said, at the end of the day, this is part of Sri Lanka, and we are trying to benefit as a country by having this special economic zone, right? So the government decision, the policy level decision making will have to be made as to how this is to be taken forward, and the Commission will be like the implementing arm to, carry it out, right? Act itself can be amended. I mean, if certain parts of the Act doesn't seem to be working after a few years, then that can be amended by Parliament. But if you look at it from the other side, if I'm an investor, or if you're an investor, let's assume that I'm coming from India, you're coming from Pakistan, or somewhere else. If we are to choose Sri Lanka, we need a platform which is investor friendly, right? You wouldn't want to come into a situation where you will be sent to 10 different departments or 10 different authorities to get your paperwork cleared for you to start investment. You need a single window system who can facilitate that. So majority of the powers and functions of the Port City Commission is to act as the single window system.
Right. I think this was pretty much emphasized also for quite some time, this single window facility. Now, Doctor, if we take a step further in that direction, now investors will have this question. There are investors coming in, and that process is going ahead. What are the other benefits, either fringe or not, the direct, indirect benefits that we can really focus on when it comes to the act that we have at hand right now for an investor? Why would they have to choose Sri Lanka over any other entity? What are what areas can we really iron out and mention, okay, look, this is what we are offering as of now, apart from the fact that there's a location that is pretty much friendly for business activity? Sure.
So location is something which cannot be disregarded, because I think that is the most fundamentally important marketing point. When we are going to attract investors, is our geographic location, and this is new land and so on. Now, in addition to that, certain incentives have been provided. Now, say, for example, if you are an authorized person who want to carry out business, and you will be able to engage employees both local and foreign. When it comes to foreign employees, they can be white collar or blue collar, right? So there will be a lot of concessions given with regard to visa requirements, and so on. Then at the moment, I know, as a matter of fact, the Commission is also trying to put certain administrative arrangements in place in consultation with the other regulatory authorities to provide online portals for submission of, say, for applications for getting development permits, registration of companies, right? And then registration of title and so on. So once those things are in place, at the moment they are not. As I said, the Act is a mother act. It provides the framework. The regulations will, make sure that, these things can be implemented easily. Once we do that, we will be able to compete with some of these other financial centers I mentioned. But then, of course, we have to take a very closer look at the say, for example, the tax regime. Now, if you go to, if you look at a country like Singapore, and it has, if I'm not mistaken, 17% corporate income tax, and that's about it, right? There is no taxation on dividends, right? And then there is no capital gains tax and so on. Whereas in Sri Lanka, we have capital gains tax, there is taxation on dividends, and then we have taxation on, the corporate income. Then if you look at the Qatar International Financial Center, they give a tax exemption for a period up to 40 years, I think, right? And certain other jurisdictions give up to 15 years. This is all in order to attract businesses. Now, why they do that is, yes, you are in a way surrendering or giving up your right to get that taxation income, but you are looking at all the indirect businesses. Now, if you take Singapore itself,
there's a net benefit.
They have 5.5 million, people living there, but any given time there will be about 5 to 6 million tourists there.
True.
And most of them have come to do business, right? And so then the hotel sector, the tourism sector, all those, will have added benefits.
Okay. Doctor, I don't want to shift this to a political discussion, but there were a lot of claims by a number of entities pertaining to the investors that have been present, as in the government with the government of China had really developed this. In terms of jurisdiction, I don't know if we are shifting away from like the areas that we want to touch on. In terms of jurisdiction, there are certain plots within this within the port city which has been given in a 99-year lease to Chinese entities, and that can be. There is a certain grey area there pertaining to who owns that land firstly, and how that land will be how that can be transferred actually. So there's an issue of ownership. If you can provide some form of clarity there, is this Sri Lankan land?
Absolutely. It is Sri Lankan land, right? So again, if we take a step back, the power to reclaim land is with the President under the State Lands Act, if I'm not mistaken, under Section 60, right? So when the land is reclaimed, it becomes part of the administrative district of Colombo if it is reclaimed in Colombo. So therefore, it's part and parcel of Sri Lankan land. Even under the UN Convention on Law of the Sea, right, Sri Lanka has jurisdiction, right, over its territorial waters, right, and air, ground as a territorial waters. So when you reclaim certain land, within your territorial waters, obviously you have the jurisdiction over that.
True.
So this perception that some people have, just because a Chinese investor invested 1.4 billion, right, to create this reclaimed land, that is their land, that is not correct. Now, even if you study the agreement, very carefully, not a single plot of land has been given to the Chinese investor on freehold basis. So even if you own freehold, there are other plots of lands in Sri Lanka which are owned on freehold basis by foreigners. That is before the Land Restriction on Alienation Act came into operation. But as far as the port city is concerned, all the land that has been given, I think if I'm not mistaken, about 112 hectares of land has been given to the investor. That is as consideration for the 1.4 billion that they invested on ground to create this. But the landowner is the government of Sri Lanka. So how it works is there is public land and marketable land, right? So the marketable land is then divided into land that is within the control of the government of Sri Lanka. They can attract investors to invest on those land plots, and there are land plots that have been given to the project company which invested the money on a leasehold basis. Now, if the project company attracts an investor, let's say that they are bringing in an investor from US or India, it could be from any other jurisdiction, coming into Sri Lanka to create, let's say, a 5-star resort. In that situation, the project company will be either able to give a sublease because they only have leasehold rights, right? But if they want to give a new lease altogether, they will have to surrender their lease, right? Back to the government. Now earlier the land was initially with the Ministry of Megapolis and then Ministry of Urban Development and UDA, now with the Port City Commission. So the project company will have to release its lease, but for releasing his lease it will collect the money from the investor, because otherwise they won't gain any money for the 1.4 billion they have invested, and there will be a new lease then granted by the government of Sri Lanka through the Port City Commission to the investor who comes in, right? So then a new investor becomes the lessee, Port City Commission becomes the lessor, is state land. So it's like any other lease agreement, right? And then the foreign investment that is coming in for the vertical development is the benefit that the country is getting.
A lot of important clarifications done there, Doctor. Thank you for that. We'll go in for a short break, but before that, to discuss and to give us a real understanding of the legal happenings within this week, here is Anuradha Wickramasinghe with Law in the Land.
Thank you, Danidu. Let's take a look as to how the law has worked in our land. Sri Lanka Telecom PLC initiated legal action against SJB parliamentarian Manusha Nayakkara in the Colombo District Court, requesting him to pay a sum of Rs 1 billion as damages, averring that irreparable loss and damage has been caused to SLT's brand image and reputation by grossly unfounded and false statements. The Court of Appeal dismissed the writ petition filed by former Southern Province Governor Rajitha Kirti Tennakoon against the appointment of Ajit Niwad Kapral as the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka without hearing it. A fundamental rights petition filed by SJB General Secretary Ranjit Bandar in the Supreme Court seeking an order quashing the cabinet decision to transfer the state-owned shares of the Keralapitiya Yugadhanani power plant to an American company and the decision to transfer the gas supply monopoly to the relevant US company was fixed for support on November 12th. The newly constructed Mathura Court Complex and Walasmula Magistrate Court building was appointed this week according to the vision of prosperity of our Honourable President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa declared open the complex via Zoom from Colombo. 1.28 billion rupees has been spent to build the new Mathura Court Complex. The new judicial complex has been constructed including one judiciary and other public facilities. That was a look at the major events of how the law had worked in our land. We will now go in for a short commercial break. Danida will be back after the break.
Hello, my name is Pivi Preksha. I am an employee in the private sector at respected conglomerate. My question is about dispute resolution process. How is the dispute resolution process conducted in the port city?
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. We are in conversation with Dr. Asanga Gunawansa. Doctor, I think we covered a bit of the fundamentals pertaining to how the port city will function and a bit of its administrative aspect as well. Now, if I'm not mistaken, it was the commission that, the initial commission that implemented the guidelines that it will have to follow in order to move forward, in order to bring in investors and in order to judge its accountability. Again, if I'm wrong, just please correct me. In that scenario, Doctor, this dispute resolution aspect, on one level, who is the governing body, who holds authority in that aspect is a question. And secondly, from the investors' side of things, whether they have much more ironed out flexible mechanisms like commercial arbitration, which we discussed last time when you were here, whether those mechanisms are in play, because if I'm not mistaken, again, those are also key aspects that investors look at. How do you see those two aspects, Doctor?
Okay, so to start with, if you leave out the Colombo port city, for the moment, and if you look at the dispute resolution regime currently in Sri Lanka, if it is a contractual dispute, because with regard to port city, we are concentrating mainly on commercial and trade transactions. So if there's a dispute relating to that, if the parties have agreed by way of agreement to submit that dispute to alternative dispute resolution, then before going to a court of law, you will have to do that.
Okay.
Right? So we have an Arbitration Act which follows the UNCITRAL model law to a large extent. And under that Arbitration Act, if the parties have agreed, for example, to submit their dispute to arbitration, the courts will not have jurisdiction over that dispute, apart from playing a supportive role in like appointing an arbitrator and summoning witnesses and facilitating enforcement applications and so on. And then if you don't have that contractual arrangement, then you can submit your dispute to court. Now, the issue, if you consider business as is in Sri Lanka without looking at the port city, is that even a commercial dispute, although the government has taken certain initiatives such as establishing the commercial high courts and so on, if you refer your dispute to the court system, because of the hierarchy of courts that we have and the system that is in place, getting a decision concerning your dispute can take anything between, say, 3 to 5 years. Right? So, especially when it comes to international investors, they wouldn't want to wait for 3 to 5 years to get a decision out, out of a court. So, they want, their dispute resolution mechanisms to be fast-tracked. So, as a result of that, most investors, I would say about 99% of them, before making the investment, would insist on international arbitration for resolution of disputes. Now, if we agree, say the Port City Commission or a local partner with this investor, agrees to that, then when there's a dispute, you will have to submit your dispute to the agreed dispute resolution center, say for example, Singapore International Arbitration Center, or it can be under the rules of the International Chamber of Commerce arbitration rules. Then the venue will be what the parties choose, or you can go to London, Paris, and so on. All these are fairly expensive, regimes to follow, if you want to resolve a dispute. Now, Singapore has created a lot of business around the international arbitration center that it has. Hong Kong has done the same thing. So why can't we do that, right? So in that context, the Colombo, the Port City Act provides provisions or has made provisions for the Commission to facilitate the establishment of an international commercial dispute resolution center within the port city, which will have the capacity to do any form of ADR from mediation, negotiation, adjudication and arbitration. In addition to that, a very important provision has been incorporated into the Act, which says when an authorized person enters into agreement with the Port City Commission, any disputes relating to such agreement will have to be resolved by way of arbitration, and that will be at the center, right? Okay. So, which I think is very, very important, because that itself allows the center to attract a lot of business. In addition to that, we have to think, the Act doesn't provide for it, but actually we have to think beyond this. We should ensure that this International Commercial Dispute Resolution Center will not only attract disputes within the port city or relating to port city. We should be able to attract dispute among governments and investors, and between investors and investors from
function as a seat of arbitration.
Yeah, from other jurisdictions, at least in South Asia, and there's huge potential for doing that. But if we are to do that, the International Commercial Dispute Resolution Center has to function as an independent entity. It can't be run like a government department, and that is understood, right? So, however, initially seed money will have to be provided. So the government might have to come up with the seed money, and then there will have to be probably a company will have to be incorporated as a company limited by guarantee or a non-profit company to run it. The board will have to be eminent arbitrators and academics and so on, and jurists who have knowledge and international reputation in this area. It might require a list of both very well trained and qualified local as well as international arbitrators. So if we do that, we will provide a very efficient dispute resolution mechanism for investors who are coming into Port City, as well as others who are who perhaps might look at Colombo as a seat of arbitration. Now, another important section is found in the Colombo Port City Act, if I'm not mistaken, section 63, which says that if port city related disputes are referred to court, then priority shall be given by courts in connection with those, which is also important. So now, say for example,
and that is binding on the courts as well.
Yeah, I mean, the act is drafted in that way. It passed by Parliament. So, as I said, it's part of the law now, right? So, what that requires the courts to do is, now, say for example, if you have a normal court case in Sri Lanka, the time gap between two court dates is like 3 to 4 months. Yeah. Right? And then your case will be listed among 100 other cases, and chances of you having half an hour to 1 hour actual to argue your case or lead evidence also is sometimes remote because of the workload, right? But so if there is say for example, pending the constitution of arbitral tribunal, if the parties make an application to court for interim relief, you don't want to wait for three or 4 months to get that relief or that matter argued. Sure. So in that context, the courts are required in terms of the Port City Act to give priority to port city related disputes.
Doctor, something that I would want to clarify now, given have we planned to have a sort of seat of arbitration within Port City itself, or will that have to function separately, as in within I think you mentioned again within the past program about how we have an area dedicated to this already, but we don't have it functioning as of now. Have we strategized in a way where we can have this seat of arbitration or an arbitration center within Port City itself, or should it be different, like a separate establishment altogether? I
mean, ideally it should be within the Port City, right? But then we have to also understand that for the vertical developments, the buildings to come up in the Port City, it will take about 3 to 5 years at least. Yeah. So the Act itself enables, until these things are in place, you can operate from outside of the Port City, somewhere else in Colombo, or Sri Lanka, but still get the benefits that are available under the Port City Act. So as I mentioned during the last program when you had me here, we have a state-of-the-art facility currently available in the World Trade Center, which is underutilized because the building infrastructure is done, is beautifully furnished and all that, but no seed money has been given to run a secretariat. So if we have the centre up and running, that can be the International Commercial Dispute Resolution Centre until the port city has building space for it to move.
All right. There is also an important aspect. Another thing I want to touch on, Doctor, when I previously mentioned about how the commission itself is being governed, or is there another overarching body which has some form that can take judiciary measure against the commission in the event there are certain disputes pertaining to decisions that the commission, just to clarify again, will be falling under the normal law of the country, and that they'll be held accountable in that method? Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. So, as I said, if any party has a contractual dispute with the commission, then the act requires you to submit it to arbitration, and then the under the relevant provisions that are applicable in the Port City Act as well as the Arbitration Act and the law of the country, those disputes will be resolved. But if somebody has, say for example, in connection with the administrative decision taken by the Port City Commission, and if you have certain grievance, right, you will still be able to seek redress under the jurisdiction of the country, for example, right? Or you will be able, there's nothing to prevent you from filing a fundamental rights application against the commission in the Superior Court. So by all means, the Colombo Port City Act is an act of Parliament. It's a law created by the legislative body of this country. So in that context, the Commission is no different to the Urban Development Authority or the NHDE or any other government institution, right? They are subject to the laws of the land. Okay.
An important clarification there, Doctor. In concluding this segment, I want to ask you, if we are to take this step to make an arbitration center in the country, that's one, it will be a huge investment, and there would be certain specialized knowledge, specialized professionals that are required. In terms of taking a step back from the entire legal discussion, will we have that kind of infrastructure going in, or should there be a huge sort of feasibility study done in that scenario before we undertake that kind of operation?
I mean, more than a feasibility study, okay, so let's say at the moment, I would not say that we have sufficient knowledge base or knowledge bank, in Sri Lanka to cater to the type of financial services, legal services, other support services that we can engage in. So that is why we need foreign expertise. But getting foreign expertise into the country and operating from the country is going to be a bit of a contentious issue, because the policymakers will have to, say, for example, consult the Bar Association, consult other institutions like the Institution of Architects, Institution of Engineers, and see how the foreign talent could partner with local talent and provide these services. So if you can get the right mix, now even in places like Singapore, you have, say for example, Singapore law firms have what is called a foreign desk, right? So there are foreign qualified lawyers who are attached to local law firms, but they don't provide services. They will not go to court and argue cases and so on, but they will provide the services to investors who are coming in and investment going out of Singapore into other jurisdictions. And also sometimes foreigners can be allowed to do a limited practice. So that is, having said that, that is a contentious issue. There will have to be some sort of consultation with the relevant professional bodies also and for both parties to understand, right, the benefits as well as what are the reservations, and then have the right mix.
Right, a lot of important things covered there. We'll take a short break and we'll join back on the international parallels and really get an understanding of where similar situations have arisen in the world. You're with Law, Land and Liberty. Stay with us.
My name is Natalia Kandaperumal and I am a front desk coordinator at an international NGO. My question is about international parallels. Are there similar parallels to the Port City legislation elsewhere?
Welcome back to Law, Land and Liberty. Doctor, the context to this entire segment comes from things like the Pandora Papers, the Panama Papers that had become an issue. Then when we say special economic zones, people try and relate it to places like the Cayman Islands or Panama, the British Virgin Islands, and sort of underlying understanding of possibility of money laundering happening. Those kind of things are attached to this as an ideology when these were put forward by certain parties as well. In addressing that, in being in that state, being in that context itself, where do you see the other parallels for Port City? Now, you did mention within our first few segments also in other areas that have really gone ahead, and we have to compete with some of the best in the entire world, and we have to say, look, come here instead of going there, pertaining to, and then we are competing with well-established economic centers, offshore economic centers. How do you draw that parallel and say, firstly, this is safe and this is important, and this is some place where you can really iron out certain difficult details when it comes to investment and really go ahead?
Correct. Okay. So the example of Cayman Islands. Now, I don't see Cayman Islands as an international financial center in that context, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, these are jurisdictions where you can, open letterbox companies and perhaps, create bank account without too many questions being asked and, park your money, mm-hmm. right? And in connection with that, a lot of benefits are given. But when you say an international financial center in the context, what we are trying to do, or what the country is trying to do, as far as the Colombo Port City Act is concerned, that is to provide or create a service-oriented center which can attract a lot of investment, inflows into the country, and therefore, thereby benefit from it. So if you look at some of the other financial centers that I mentioned, countries like Singapore or Hong Kong, even Labuan, in Malaysia, the Gujarati International Financial Center in India, none of these centers have bad reputation for money laundering or providing illegal activities and so on, right? In fact, the financial regime in Singapore is one of the most strict financial regimes, as far as I'm aware of, and so is Hong Kong. So what we need to do is, that is why I also highlighted the importance of having regulations earlier. Mm-hmm. We need to have regulations in place, right? And these regulations will have to ensure that there are checks and balances created to make sure that whilst we attract investment, right, there is no money laundering, there is no illegal money coming in, there is no illegal extraction of funds, and so on. So the Port City Commission is also, in that context, is expected to work very closely with the monetary authorities in Sri Lanka, like the Department of Exchange Control, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, to ensure that those checks and balances are put in place. Mm-hmm. The idea is to create ease of doing business, to operate as a single window system, attract investors, but definitely it is not an idea, or there is no room in the Port City Act to create Colombo as a financial hub for illegal money, if that is a concern. Mm-hmm.
This concern, Doctor, comes up with the fact that there were claims made about how the black money, as some people would call it, again the definition of laundering, being invested here when we try to relax measures a lot. If we are to compare a Port City to, it doesn't have to be similar to another center, another city, or another similar investment. But is there a comparison that we can make and mention? Okay, look, they followed similar steps in building their economic center, in building their economic zones, and that was successful. And we here are taking a step further, we are better, and we can actually gain that form of success.
Sure. So if you want to make a comparison, I would say Singapore is not a great comparison in that context, because Singapore is a city-state. Yeah. The concessions and everything that is available, is applicable to the entire state. Yeah. But as a special economic zone or region, if you look at another authority that is functioning very well, which we can take as an example, I would say Dubai, Qatar, the Gujarati International Financial Center, then Labuan in Malaysia. These are things that we can look at. So if you look at if you see the way these entities have been established now, DIFC and the Qatar International Financial Center, DIFC is the Dubai International Financial Center, they don't have a very long history. Right? The Qatar International Financial Center may have been around for about approximately 10 years. The Dubai International Financial Center maybe for 2 decades, and that's not a long history. So they all started like us, and then they progress, step by step. So you have to look at the Sri Lankan situation also in that context. We can't create because see, this is a new area that we are getting into, right? And the kind of democracy that operates in Sri Lanka is very different to the democracy that operates in Singapore. And also our system of government is very different to Qatar and Dubai. Now in Qatar and Dubai, they have authoritarian regimes and they can pass laws without them being questioned, in a court of law, being severely criticized in parliament and so on. But we have checks and balances within the national system itself. So that is why, we are in a more unique situation. Like the Port City Bill was heavily debated in Parliament. There were, if I'm not mistaken, 17 or 18 applicants who went before Supreme Court. Supreme Court vetted it, and so after Supreme Court gave its clearance and subject to certain amendments, those amendments have been incorporated. Now we have a statute. Now we have to try and make it work, as I mentioned earlier, to attract businesses, right? So in order to do that, we on day one, we will not be able to compete with Singapore, Dubai or Qatar or any of these other financial centers. It's a long road, but we have taken a start. So now from there onwards, we will have to go on adjusting and implementing new regulations to, in order to facilitate investors to find Sri Lanka as an attractive destination.
All right, I think a lot of important things clarified there. Dr. Asanga Gunawansa, the lead counsel at the Colombo Law Alliance. He's a visiting professor at the University of Morto and a legal consultant to the Green Climate Fund. Thank you so much for giving us this time and really clarifying a lot of doubts put into the Port City. Hopefully we'll see you again, Doctor.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.
All right. The Port City has been given a lot of priority by the current government in an effort to supplement the economic conditions of the country and create a more conducive environment for business activities. It is receiving backlash primarily because major projects have always received a speculative eye in Sri Lanka. The current Premier of China, Li Keqiang, once shared a very concise statement at the World Economic Forum pertaining to growth. He stated that innovation is an inexhaustible engine for economic development. That is all from us here at Law, Land and Liberty. If you had missed today's program, you can watch the entire episode on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Derana English. Join us again next week as we break down a contemporary legal topic. I'm Johnney. Have a great night.